go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our November monthly program. My name is Brian Zaint. I'm the Executive Director for Pilchuck Audubon. Just a few quick announcements before we get to our presentation tonight. I'm excited to announce that we have a new board member as of about a week ago. Bea Redfield is going to be our new membership committee chair. And she is the executive director for the Port Townsend Marine Science Center. So we're really excited to have her on the board going forward. And there'll be a brief introduction to her in the upcoming newsletter next month. So keep an eye out for that to learn more about Bea. The Christmas bird count is coming up. We have two circles that we're sponsoring again this year, the Edmonds South County CBC, and that will be on December 17th. And then the Everett Marysville CBC, which will be on December 31st. I will put the link for more information on those in the chat here in a moment, and you can contact the two compilers for either of those if you'd like to get involved. I'm the compiler this year for the Edmonds CBC, so you can just email me if you want to get involved or have questions about that. And then I also will put a link in the chat in a second. We have some new pages on our website I'd like to share with everyone. I'll just make you aware of them. We have a new Bird Friendly Communities kind of homepage or landing page that has links to other pages on our website, and those include a lights out page, backyard habitats, and preventing window collisions. And so I will put a link for that so you can check out some of that information on our website that's brand new. And I think that's all I have for announcements tonight. And so if you have any questions during the presentation tonight, feel free to put those in the chat and we'll get to those at the end. And with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to you, Kim, and you can go ahead and get started tonight.
Okay, thank you. Let me share screen, share sound, share screen. There it works. First off, it's really nice to be back talking to you guys at Pilchuck. I'm really good friends with Kathleen Snyder, so I always think very fondly of you as a group. Before I get started, I just want to say that of all the talks I give, and I give lots of talks, in some ways I think this is going to become my favorite. And it's going to become my favorite because this is the information I know better than anything else that I talk about. When I went to college way back in the day, I went to study the evolution of behavior and specifically the evolution of intelligence. And so my undergraduate degrees, all my courses that I could manage focused on the evolution, either evolution or intelligence. And then I went on and I got a master's degree in biology where I studied the evolution of intelligence. And I switched to psychology because I realized that biologists didn't know that much about intelligence to learn more about intelligence so I could understand the evolution of intelligence. So back in the day, no one was studying bird intelligence, but I know a lot about animal intelligence and how you measure animal intelligence. And I've been following the literature since the late 1970s. So this really is near and dear to my heart. So it is a pleasure to talk about. So let's talk about why you call birds bird brains or why you use bird brain as a nasty thing to say about somebody. Okay, it never wants to go first thing. So come on, you should go. I'm clicking right and it's not going. There we go, finally, all right. So let me start with just the general question of why is being a bird brain such an insulting thing to say? Why do people think that birds are stupid? And let me flip back 50 years to about 1970. And I'm going to pretend we're in 1970 and I'm a college professor talking about comparative animal intelligence. Why would I justify to you the complete certainty that birds are pretty dumb? So here's what I would say if this were 1970. And really, the attitude then was based on really anthropomorphic thinking, meaning that we're very intelligent, our brains look a certain way. Therefore, only animals that have brains like ours could possibly be intelligent. Birds do not have brains like ours, ergo, they're not very intelligent. So let's talk about exactly how their brains are different. First off, I would say to you, birds' heads are just too darn small to have a good brain. I mean, you just need a big enough brain. You need enough neurons. And I mean, look at birds are little. They just don't have a lot of space for a brain. So right there, I can tell you that birds can't possibly be very smart, because even rather large birds like this golden eagle here, I mean, look at its brain. I mean, here's the human's brain. Look at its brain right there. Again, you know, walnut sized is really good for a bird, but it's still not very big. So their brains just aren't, their heads just aren't big enough. And it's worse than that. It's worse than that because whereas in primates, the brain is just about the size of the skull. Brains fit really and fill the entire skull. That's not true with birds. So birds' brains are even smaller than you think they are by looking at them. And the main reason for that is because their eyes are so large. So here we've got, trying to remember what kind of owls these are. I think these are great horned owl chicks. But here's their skulls. And this black area here, this is all eye. The brain is this yellow. If this were a human skull, the brain would go up to about here. So even relative to the size of their skull, their brains are smaller than ours are. To be more concrete about it, our eyes, human eyes, make up about 1% of the volume of our craniums, whereas in birds, it can be up to 15% of the size of their cranium. So it's quite a difference. Or another way to think about it, if our eyes were as large as owl eyes, they would be the size of small grapefruit. Again, that's how much space they're taking up. And I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but just to show you yet another picture of this. This is a cast or a model of a bald eagle skull. Look, you can imagine how big that eye is. So all you've got for brain is just back there, okay? So their brains are just simply too small. Again, it's even worse than that. And the reason it's worse than that, I'm gonna get rid of this so it doesn't cover up. I'm doing okay. The instinct, quote unquote, instinct part of the brain is also relatively large. So if you look at a dog brain here, all of this beige, well, most of this beige, not here, but most of this brain is a part of the brain that has to do with thoughts and thinking and intelligence. If you look at a bird brain, only about half the brain does, okay? It's only this right here. So it's really less than half the brain, but certainly quite a bit, relatively less than you find in mammals. So because their cerebellums are so large, I did that backward. This is the cerebellum. This is the instinct part of the brain. This is the thinking part of the brain. But because their cerebellum and optic lobes are so large, they just don't have a lot of room for thinking parts of the brain. And again, the story gets worse and worse. They also completely lack a neocortex. And a neocortex is the part of the brain in mammals that is where we think. That's where our intelligence is seated. So we've got a songbird brain versus a human brain. And let's look at the human brain first. All this part of the brain that looks like cauliflower is the cerebrum. And it's covered by a thin covering, a peel, a skin, whatever you want to call it, called the cerebral cortex. Cortex actually means skin. It's very, very thin, and it is the best of the best. I mean, your highest, most highly developed reasoning skills, that thinking is being done in the cerebral cortex. Well, you can see that birds, they don't got one. So, you know, that doesn't suggest that they're very intelligent. Also, the reason the human cerebrum is so wrinkled like this is because think of a piece of tinfoil. If you take a really large piece of tinfoil, I mean, you can take a piece of tinfoil that's, you know, 3 feet by 3 feet and you squinch it up, you can make it, you know, the size of a golf ball. And the way you do that is it just bends in and folds in on itself. Well, that's exactly what's happening here. So if you take the human cerebral cortex and spread it out, stretched it out like a sheet of tinfoil that had been wrinkled up, it's about 2.5 or a little bit more square feet. So we've got a lot of cerebral cortex. Birds don't have any. Now, in mammals, if you look at mammals, there's not a perfect, but a very strong correlation between how smart the animal is and how convoluted the cerebral cortex is. So rats are less than cats, or less than chimps, or less than people. Dolphins are an outlier. Their brains actually have more folds and sulci than ours do. But generally, the number of folds correlates with intelligence. And again, birds don't have any. So that's the case I would have made to you back in 1970 or so about why I know that birds can't possibly be very intelligent. Let me now give you a more modern perspective. This, by the way, is an image of a woodpecker skull and brain here. I guess where I would start if I were trying to make a case today about avian intelligence is that you have to remember that birds evolved to be totally different than mammals. And in fact, the leitmotif of bird evolution, and as you know, I like to talk about bird evolution, is to go for lighter and lighter weight, generally smaller and smaller size and lighter weight. And birds' brains have done that. They're not just small overall, they've managed to become very efficient. So they're small, but there's a real lot crammed in there. In particular, they can afford to have smaller brains, which is good because brains are very heavy. So this way they weigh less by decreasing the size of each brain cell. So if each brain cell is a real fraction of the size of a mammalian brain cell, you can get a lot of brain cells in a very small space. So they're smaller and then more densely packed. A little bit of an aside here. You know, we keep talking, they used to keep talking so much about how small bird brains were, but another way of looking at it is brain size in relation to body size. And if you do that, then birds don't look bad at all. In fact, some birds, especially hummingbirds, for example, but many small birds have brain to body weight ratios better than humans, better than virtually every mammal. In fact, hummingbirds have the highest brain to body ratio of any vertebrate. It's twice the size of ours. So some people think that that's a better measurement anyway than absolute size. Okay. Again, the idea had been that they've got this smooth brain, they lack a cerebral cortex, or at least they don't have many convolutions, so they can't have much of a cortex. But now we know that smoothness is irrelevant because they don't have a cerebrum. They don't have a cerebral cortex. They have a structure called a pallium. The pallium has different parts to it, but it's all pallium that's responsible for their thinking. And it's just an entirely different structure. Now, when this was first discovered, I mean, I can tell you that people use that as another piece of evidence that birds had to be stupid, because the pallium embryologically derives from cells that become part of the instinctive part of mammal brains rather than the thinking part. So it was actually considered further evidence that this must all be instinctive tissue. But it turns out that it's not true. In birds, that is the part of the brain that they use for learning and intelligence. So to kind of sum that part up, classically, what you would say about mammals is that, look, the green area is thinking and the purple area is instinct. That birds had almost no thinking area. It was mostly all instinct. The modern view is that birds have a lot of green. They have a lot of thinking area. It's just different than what mammals have. To go into that just a little bit deeper, there's that neocortex I've been talking about again. The neocortex has 6 layers. It always has 6 layers. That's very fixed. And as our brains get bigger, what happens more than anything is the cells get stretched further and further apart. Let me make an analogy for you of what's going on. Imagine I want to have a lot of computing power. So what I do is I buy 8 computers and I hook them up together. I connect them up together. And now those 8 computers are smarter than any one of the computers. But what if what I do is now I replace my 2-foot cords that are connecting them with 20-foot cords? Are the computers any smarter? No. The length of the cords that connect the computers, or in the brain, the length of the cords that connect the neurons don't themselves make you any smarter. And if you look at mammalian brains, a lot of the space, a lot of the density is taken up with the cords that connect the neurons rather than the cell bodies of the neurons proper. And intelligence is driven by the number of cell bodies, not the length of the cords. So birds' brains are just more densely packed. Let me show you this, at least part of this. This is a pyramidal cell, which is a very, very common cell in mammal brains in the neocortex. There's the cell body. That's where that's what's going to count for intelligence. All this other stuff, dendrites and axons and terminal branches, they're just used to wire cells together. They don't contribute to intelligence as directly. So look at how small the cell body is as a function of the size of this overall cell. I couldn't find a good picture of a bird brain to show you. They're really hard to come by, or a bird brain cell to show you, but they're nothing like that. I mean, they're like this big, and the cell body takes up most of it. So again, the neocortex in mammals, you've got these 6 layers, and the cells are pretty far apart. In birds, what you've got is not arranged into layers, but arranged into what are called nuclei. People say they're like cloves of garlic. You can think of them that way. But the cells are very, very closely packed together. And really what you've lost is not brain cells, you've lost the wires connecting them. In fact, birds, parrots, for example, have as many brain cells as a mid-sized primate, as a monkey. So they may be smaller, but their brains are not necessarily inferior. So again, just to sum this up, yes, mammals have larger brains, but birds make up for that by having smaller, more densely packed neurons. And in fact, I didn't say this before, the proportion of the neurons that are in the forebrain, the part of the brain responsible for thinking in birds, is actually greater than it is for mammals. So any argument that birds have to be stupid based on their neuroanatomy really has fallen out of favor. So that's it for the biology. Now we'll kind of talk more psychology. I wanted to talk about bird intelligence, our bird's intelligence. So let's talk about what intelligence is. And as an old psych professor, I can tell you there is no one agreed upon definition of intelligent. The kinds of things people talk about when they talk about intelligence is the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills, or in other words, to learn, to adapt to new situations, in other words, to be flexible rather than rigid, and more generally, the ability to reason, to plan, to problem solve, to think abstractly, to understand ideas, and to use insight. And that's what I want to focus on. Birds can do all of that. Birds can do all of that. Now, I told you when I went to college and then grad school, undergrad and then grad school, I studied the evolution of intelligence. So I can tell you that for a long time, people have been asking the question, how do you know an animal is intelligent? And I can tell you that before they started studying birds, these are the kinds of things people look at. They look at tool use, they look at play behavior, they look at the ability to understand abstract concretes, they look at memory ability, problem-solving ability, the ability to recognize oneself, self-recognition, the ability to make causal inferences, A causes B, and the ability to anticipate others' future behavior. So that's what I want to talk about with birds. And again, to get ahead of myself and make a long story short, birds are really good at all of these. In many cases, as good as primates, certainly better than dogs and cats. So, you know, they're really reasonably bright. So let me start with tool use. To more than 105 at least 105 species of birds have been shown to use tools. There may be more, but I've seen reference to 105 different species. They use tools for all sorts of reasons. You've got a lot of different birds using them, and so they use them for all sorts of reasons. They use them to acquire food. They use them to take care of their bodies. They use them for defense. They use them for courtship. So tool use is a very broad-based behavior among birds in terms of the number of species and in terms of the number of kinds of uses that they have. Now, some birds, the tool use appears to be genetic or instinctive, meaning if you take an egg and you hatch it and the bird is all by itself, it's never seen any other birds, it still picks up a tool and uses it. So that's clearly in its genome. Other birds and other species learn how to use tools all by themselves, perhaps by trial and error learning, perhaps by insight. And other birds learn from observing others. sometimes even other species of birds. So they copy, in other words. And that especially is considered very, very intelligent for an animal to do that. Well, let me give you some examples of the way that birds use tools. So one example is drumming. That's a picture of some palm cockatoos, excuse me. Basically what these do, and it's male birds who do this, is they find a stick and then they trim it. They make it the length that they want. They trim off all the leaves and side branches, and then they take the stick and they pound it on a hollow tree to make a big booming sound that attracts females. So this is a courtship display. It also might be to defend territory. Different males use different rhythms and they try to outdo each other, and that's how they court females. One of my favorite ways that birds use tools is called fish baiting. This is a greenbacked heron. The reason I like fish baiting is because it not only demonstrates tool use, but it also demonstrates self-restraint, the ability to delay gratification. Because what fish baiting is you take something that's edible, whether it be a piece of bread or whether it be a berry or whether it be an insect, and instead of eating that item, what you do is you drop it into a stream or a pond and you wait for a fish to come and get it, just like humans when they fish, right? Put worms on the hooks. The fish come and then you eat the fish. But in many cases, the birds are using food items like worms or insects that they normally eat. You know, normally if they just found one, they would eat it. So again, they have to delay gratification to instead use it as bait to get a fish. There are quite a number of birds that do this. Herons do it, corvids do it, some raptors do it, some gulls do it, like the lesser blackback gull. Kingfishers do it, bitterns have been seen to do it. So birds that live near water, this is something that they do. And that's actually, again, when I studied mostly apes when I was in graduate school. If we had seen an ape do this, we would have been very impressed with our ape. So we should be very impressed with this bird. Other birds use tools as a weapon. And yes, that's from the birds, Alfred Hitchcock. Then I use this picture, not because these guys are using tools as weapons right now, to remind myself that this has been seen only in corvids. Corvids are the ones that use tools as weapons. They throw things at each other. They drop things on each other. There's one little video I've seen, I couldn't get a copy of it, that showed a Steller's jay, which was fighting with a crow, and it broke off a stick and it lunged at the crow with the stick, a twig. And of course that was useful because it was like a knight in shining armor using a lance. It could keep far away from the crow and poke at it. Eventually the crow manages to steal the twig and then starts poking the jay with it. But that was a really nice example when I found it of using a tool as a weapon. Okay, switch to another type of bird. A number of birds do this. This is a horned puffin, but some birds use tools as preening tools. Now, to be fair, this is more commonly seen in captive birds than in wild birds, but this is a wild bird and I'll show you it doing it. Cormorants do it, oyster catchers do it, parrots do it. So birds that are not particularly closely related to each other, a number of different species use a preening tool, and I can show you a video of that right here. Okay, doesn't last very long, but you can see what's going to happen there. Okay. Another way they use tools is to use them to probe for insects. And this one also really sings to me because it was when I was in graduate school that it was discovered that apes do this exact same thing, where they'll find a stick, they'll trim it, and then they'll stick it in termite mounds or in ant hills, let the ants swarm up it, and then eat the ants. So probing for insects. This is a woodpecker finch here. It's not a casual thing. And we were so excited when the apes did this. This was considered just so highly intelligent. the reason I'm particularly impressed with the woodpecker pecker finch and its ability to do this is more than 50% of the food they eat is caught this way. So it's not a casual, trivial thing. It's not something that just a few of them do. They depend upon probing for insects in order to survive. So tool use is 100% key to their survival. Now, the bird that is the best tool user that we know of in the wild of all birds is this guy here. It's a New Caledonian crow, and arguably at least the best tool user, because they use many different types of tools and they use them for a whole variety of tasks. And different groups of New Caledonian crows make different tools or make them differently. So there's clearly a learning component and a passing down from generation to generation component. But what's really telling about these birds and how important tool using is for them is their beaks are actually different than the beaks of other crows. They're straighter and blunter, and it's thought that they evolved this change to the shape of their beak because it makes it easier to manipulate tools. So tools are obviously very important to them. Just one or two more examples and we'll move off of tool use. Anting. This is a Javan myna. Again, it's not the only bird that does this. In fact, many North American passerines do this. Anting is when you pick up a bug, often an ant, not always, as you can see here. And what you do is you rub it on yourself. You use it for preening. And the thought is that, it can be an ant, a caterpillar, a millipede, sometimes even snails. But what you do, or the benefit you get from rubbing it all over your body is, for example, ants produce formic acid. And it's thought that this cleanses them. They're cleansing themselves of ectoparasites, of mites and lice in their feathers, which would either be killed or flee from the acid. It's very useful in maintaining their health. But anting is practiced by blue jays, by red-winged blackbirds, by northern cardinals, by dippers, by song sparrows, by juncos, by robins. So a lot of the birds you're familiar with, and are local, actually do this. And my last example of tool use is this Egyptian vulture that uses rocks as a battering ram. I mean, it picks up a rock and it drops it on a bird egg in order to crack it. They're not just really opportunistic with this, they go searching for the stones. So they'll go as far as 50 yards away to find a stone. So it's not just what's right there. So they're pretty particular about what they want. Well, finally, to finish up this tool use, I'm going to show you a crow really being an amazing tool user. Skip this up to.
All right, can I stay in here?
Started at about 27.
Here with the individual objects. But this is the first time he's seen them arranged like this. 8 separate stages that must be completed in a specific order if the puzzle is to be solved. And if the bird succeeds, it'll be a world first. He takes time to have a look and then starts with the short stick. Stage 1. He finds it's too short to reach the food. He then sets off to get the first stone. But he drops it. And another. He seems to be stuck. But then, something seems to click. He deploys the first stone. And then another. it. The 8th and final stage. Success. 8 individual stages of one complex puzzle completed.
I just wanted to say, because I cut off the very beginning, what they said is that the bird had been familiarized with each of the pieces, but had never seen them put together. And so this was the first time that it had seen them all together, and it, in one trial, figured out how to do that. So sequential tool use, again, is something that if any other animal did it, any mammal did it, you'd say, oh my gosh, that's an incredible sign of intelligence. Well, let's switch off of tool use and on to play behavior. You know, again, in mammals, there's a very strong correlation between brain size and play behavior. And it seems to be true in birds as well. But let's talk about play behavior. Okay. Again, just like birds use lots of different objects as tools and do different things with them, they also do lots of type of play. So they play with objects, for example, manipulating things for no reason. The birds that cache will play cache, meaning that instead of putting an acorn in that hole, they pick up something else that's inedible and cache it. There's flight play, which is when birds do loops in the air for no apparent reason, except that they're enjoying it. Bath play. I have a pond in my yard and I see this all the time where the birds are splashing way more than they need to get clean. They just seem to find it pleasurable. Birds slide down inclines, they hang upside down for no reason, and they make funny sounds. Do vocal play. They just make odd sounds, kind of like a toddler would. And you can divide these types of play into bigger categories. There's solitary or solo play, hanging, swinging, sliding. You just do it all by yourself. There's object play, where you use some sort of a toy, you throw it, you drop it and pick it up and drop it again like a toddler. And social play, where, for example, you chase each other or play tag. And birds do all of these. And, you know, this is all of it. So again, just let me show you some kind of nice examples of birds playing. The first one is actually the least impressive, but it's so fun to watch. I couldn't help but show it, which is that there are many birds. You can find hundreds of videos like this on YouTube, that if you play music, they'll dance for you. They just like the beat. Here we go. You don't have to teach them to do this. They just do it. Makes me want to dance. So anyway, there's dancing behavior. Okay. Another really common thing you see in birds, especially in corvids, is sliding. This actually isn't the best video I've ever seen of it, but it was the best video I could find recently. And what they do is they usually take something like a lid, you know, or the top of a Tupperware container, and they carry it to the top of a slope, and then they just ski down. They, you know, snowboard down, and they do it again and again and again. Again, for no apparent reason, except they look like they want to do it, that it's fun. Slide down one more time for us. This bird is not very good compared to others, but he's trying. Okay. Another thing, and I've actually seen this live myself, is swans surfing. And when I gave this lecture a couple of weeks ago, someone said that they had actually seen what did they see? It was something local that was doing it that really surprised me, but there was a local bird. These are Australian black swans. And on Manly Beach, I was there, and they surfed. They rode the waves. And when I saw them, because, you know, I mean, the birds I was really carefully watching, they didn't seem to be trying to feed. There was no sense that they were, like I said, getting food out of this anyway. And I watched them for maybe 15 minutes and moved on. So this was something that they just did over and over and over again. Maybe the coolest form of social play that I've read about is done by apostle birds. Apostle birds are Australian as well, and they're related to, but they're not corvids, but they're very closely related to corvids. And their favorite game that everybody always reports, I call chase the guy with the stick. That sort of sums it up, because what one bird will do is pick up a stick and wave it at its fellows, who then chase it and eventually drops the stick, or another bird grabs the stick, and then they all chase that guy with the stick. And they can do this again for, you know, 10 or 15 minutes at a shot. It's a really pretty common behavior. I mean, a lot of people have reported seeing it. So, you know, it's their form of tag. So that's a really nice example of social play. Well, play is important enough to some birds that there's now evidence, this is really pretty new, that they actually encourage each other to play. I mean, not just by playing in front of them, but some birds have even evolved a call that they make, a vocalization that encourages their fellows to play with them. So I'm going to show you that next. Okay, so turn this on.
Biology.
Skip to 2, because that's really will get us there. Okay.
Vocal creatures. One of their calls is only associated with play behavior, the so-called play call. It sounds a little bit like this. Wow, 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 wow.
Raoul thinks the sound of the play call alone has the power to change the mood of any Kia that hears it, causing them to instantly become more playful. He has recorded this call and is about to play it to the group for the very first time. At the moment, all is quiet, and the birds no longer seem interested in the toys. Will simply hearing the call make them want to play again? The response is immediate. The group bursts back into life. Those that hear it play with whomever or whatever they come across.
What we saw here, together with evidence from previous experiments in the wild, strongly suggest that those birds that hear the play call are put into a playful mood.
It's
Those birds are Kias. You'll see Kias again. Kias are the most common of the New Zealand parrots, which are somewhat different than other parrots. Just to finish up on play, a recent study just came out last year, looked at brain size by type of play in Australian birds, and basically, just like in mammals, birds that played socially had larger brains than those who played only with objects, who had larger brains than those that played by themselves, that had larger brains than non-players. So that's exactly the pattern that you see in mammals, and again, indicates that play behavior, or kind of is confirmatory evidence that play behavior is indicative of intelligence. Okay, when we move on to abstract concepts, and I always get a kind of pause when I think about this. I made a complete fool of myself when I switched from biology to psychology. I went to my first psych outside speaker, a lecturer came, a professor from Harvard came and talked about birds understanding abstract concepts. And I raised my hand as an evolutionary biologist at the end and said, this makes no sense to me. I can't believe you spent 5 years studying this, because of course birds can understand abstract concepts. How do you think they survive if they can't recognize water? Water in a puddle, water in a lake, water in a stream, water in a raindrop. And I got pilloried for saying that. But basically, the way you ask the question of any animal, including birds, do they have abstract concepts, is you start off by showing them 2 pictures at once. So say you've got a picture of keys and a picture of flowers. And what you do is you reward them with food if they peck the key, but not if they peck the flower. And you do that over and over and over again. And then, so you're training them. And then what you do is you put them in a test situation where now they're seeing keys they've never seen before versus things of all sorts that they've never seen before to see whether or not they'll only peck at the keys. And they do. I mean, that's the answer. So all sorts of abstract concepts are very easy to demonstrate in the lab. Babies, cakes, cars, ducks, flowers, hats, shoes, you know, even things that aren't part of their natural world. So again, there's tons and tons and tons of research on this. My favorite was done by a researcher in Japan named Watanabe, and he started doing this research back in the mid-90s. And the first of his studies that I'm aware of, he wanted to see if they really could understand abstract concepts. And so what he did is he started with a small number of Picassos, like on the left, and a small number of Monets. And he either trained them that they get food for pecking at the Picasso, or the other half of the birds, they get food for pecking at the Monets. And once they got that down, he showed them lots and lots and lots of Picassos and Monets, and birds had no trouble whatsoever distinguishing a Picasso from a Monet, which is a pretty abstract thing to be able to do. But if you think that, well, they don't really, you know, they look, you know, pretty different from each other, maybe it's not that hard. He then followed that up in 2001 by training other pigeons to distinguish Chagall's from Van Gogh's. And again, it was not a difficult thing to do. The birds learned this very well, very easily, so that they've, even if you want, have an artistic sense or can distinguish different styles of art. And this is true even when the pictures were presented in black and white, so there were no color cues, when they were blurred so that you couldn't get any detail, or they were half occluded. So very, you know, something that they had no trouble doing at all. And then he figured, well, if they can do it visually, they probably can do it vocally. So he did the same sort of study showing that birds can distinguish Bach from Schoenberg. If you're a classical music fan, you'll know how different their music is, but still it's two different styles of classical music, and they could do that. And then they very easily generalized those birds and could distinguish Vivaldi, of course, very Baroque, from Elliott Carter, a modern classical composer. So they can do it with music as well. And then this guy just has so many studies. This is another one I think is particularly nice. In 2009, again, he's just trying to show how abstract their concepts are. He trained them to discriminate between quote unquote good children's art and bad children's art. So, you know, a little bit of the art critic in them. And again, they had no trouble doing that. So some sort of, you know, abstract concept there for sure. Anyway, there've been so much research on this, but I hope I've convinced you by talking about Watanabe's research that they really do have some pretty abstract concepts. And then there's memory, okay? And then there's memory. Memory is clearly something that benefits birds in the wild, especially birds that cache food or, you know, have different places that they visit that, you know, are particularly rich food sources. And let me just say that you don't have to go into the lab. We know by looking at birds in the wild how excellent their memories are. Probably, arguably, well, certainly one of the best, if not the best, birds at this is the Clark's nutcracker, which we have right here on the eastern side of the Cascades. Clark nutcrackers cache up to 33,000 seeds every season. And what they do is they take them and they bury them and they find most of them. And they don't do it by, you know, by hunting around until they find a seed. They really unerringly go to where a seed was buried, and they find it months later, sometimes as long as 9 months later. So they have remarkable memories. The reason that birds cache food, in particular these Clark's nutcrackers cache food, is because they live at high elevations, like I said, around here east of the Cascades, east side of the Cascades. It means that they can remain at high elevations all year round because they can find seeds that they put into bare ground even when it's covered with a foot of snow. They go right to the right spot and dig down and find it. So it lets them stay at high elevations all year round. And it also lets them start breeding earlier because you don't need to wait for a new crop of insects or a new crop of seeds. You've got all these seeds that you've cached. They're not the only bird that caches. Certainly black-capped chickadees have been known to cache, acorn woodpeckers cache, but like I said, I think that these Clark's nutcrackers are the best. Another bird that has a very, very small brain because it's so little, though again, its brain-body ratio is really good, are hummingbirds type of birds. Their brains are only about the size of a grain of rice, but they have really, really good memories. So for example, they remember which flowers they visited and they don't go back to them for some period of time. And they wait different periods of time for different flowers because some flowers refill the nectar more quickly than others. So they know how long they have to wait before going back to each individual flower. And they're, you know, again, they don't make a lot of errors with this. They revisit them once they're full, and it's different for different species. The other thing hummingbirds do is if you fill hummingbird feeders and say it's the same person, like my husband does the hummingbird feeder filling in the winter, when they see Ed and the feeders are empty, I've been bad, I've let it go an extra day or two, they start clicking at him. It's like they're trying to say, fill the feeders, because they don't click at him when the feeders are filled, but they know that he feeds them and they come click at him because we've got a bunch of hummingbirds that stay near our house all winter. So in the wild, most people will agree that at least some birds have really prodigious memories. And you can really show this in the lab. This is a scrub jay here. And this is work by two researchers named Clayton and Dixon. They started their work in the late 1990s and then continued for some time. But the thing about scrub jays and why they used scrub jays is scrub jays cache two different types of food in the wild. They cache imperishable things, certain types of seeds that when you bury them, they last a really long time. And then they also cache very highly perishable insects that are only good for 5 or 6 days, and then they start rotting. And they used the fact that the birds cache these two different types of things to study their memory. So what they did is they brought some scrub jays into the lab and they gave them all of these ice cube trays that are filled with sand, and they put these Lego backings behind them, but all the ice trays had different combinations of Legos here. Okay, so they had a different backdrop, and then they filled the trays with sand, and again they decorated them differently, and they allowed the birds to cache both mealworms, perishable, and peanuts, imperishable. And basically what they found is that even when they moved the trays around, as long as they kept the same background, the birds could find what they were looking for, only they didn't give them that many things to cache. So there were a lot of empty, empty compartments. They didn't go to those. They went to the ones that they had used. But they also only went back to the worms for the first 5 days, and then they stopped, and then only went back to the peanuts. Except in one variant of the study, what they did is then they replaced the worms every couple of days. So the worms were always fresh. And at that point, they went back to the worms all the time too. Anyway, it's considered to be a demonstration of how good their memories are in the lab. Again, another aspect of intelligence is self-awareness. And the reason I've got a little toddler there is because the classic way of testing self-awareness, meaning the ability to recognize yourself, is called the mirror test. And I've done this many times on children in front of my classes to show them. But what you do is you're playing with a toddler, and you've got some finger paint on your finger, and in the middle of playing with the toddler, you just touch their nose. And so now they've got a smear of red or green or blue on their nose, okay? Imagine I did that to you. Imagine I went to wipe away something on your face, and now I've left this red patch on your nose, and now you look in a mirror. What do? Well, what you do as an adult is you start pawing at your own nose, like, what's wrong with my nose? If you don't recognize yourself, you start pawing at that funny kid in the mirror, and you paw the mirror not yourself. Well, if you're talking about human children, most of them, more than half, the 50% point, the point where 50% of kids can pass is about 18 months of age. By 2 years, almost all children will pass. And some non-humans we know have passed. Great apes can pass, dolphins can pass, elephants can pass. But now we know that magpies can pass. So let me show you this. Here's a magpie passing the mirror test.
Humans aren't the only ones aware of their own reflection. Birds can recognize themselves as well. Researchers have shown this for the first time by placing different colored dots on magpies' necks. The birds could only catch a glimpse of the stickers if they looked in the mirror. Here you can see a bird scratch its neck when it notices a brightly colored sticker. Some magpies tried to remove the sticker with their beaks, while others used their feet. Birds that were tagged with black spots that blended in with their feathers didn't react when they looked in the mirror. Magpies have bigger brains than other birds that allow for lots of connections between different brain areas. Researchers think this may explain why they can recognize themselves while other bird species may not be able to.
So I should point out there are lots and lots and lots of mammals that can't pass this test. We don't know how many birds can because they haven't been tried on many birds. They've been tried on lots and lots of mammals, but we certainly know that these European magpies can. Well, that brings us to problem solving. And I realize I also should have highlighted insight here, but I didn't because this is very blurry, but it's an example of a parakeet or a small parrot demonstrating insight. Insight is when, well, insight is the opposite of trial and error learning. Trial and error learning is not considered as intelligent as insight. In trial and error learning, what you do is, like in a puzzle box like this, you pick up a piece and you try to put it in every hole, and eventually you find the right hole. So you get the right answer, but clearly you had to work your way through it. Insight is when you pick up a piece, you stare at the puzzle box, and then you walk right over to the right piece, the right hole, and stick the piece in. And birds have demonstrated their ability to solve problems, and also some species of birds, insight. I think I forgot to say that later. Anyway, here's an example of some problem solving by a crow. Perhaps you're familiar with Aesop's classic fable, the crow and the pitcher, where you've got a crow that's really, really thirsty. And what it does is it drops pebbles into a pitcher, which has an inch of water in it. So the water rises and then they can get their drink. These crows, and I don't remember what species they are, passed with no training whatsoever doing that they would drop stones into containers to raise the volume of water. So Aesop wasn't crazy. But what was interesting is these very same birds clearly understood that water was different than other substances, because if you took a test tube and you filled it with an inch of sawdust and then put a mealyworm on top of it, none of them bothered to try to drop pebbles onto it to raise the volume of sawdust or sand. So, there is some discrimination that this works with water, but it doesn't work with solids. And they also learned to use bigger stones after time. Oh, it took them some time to learn that. Okay. Here's a Kia again. I'm very fond of Kia because I used to live in New Zealand and they really are smart birds. Here's Kia solving some very complex problems.
Does the Kia's boundless playfulness and curiosity have anything to do with intelligence? A research team wants to find out and puts the Kias through a battery of scientific tests. The scientist places a nut in a plexibox with several ways to get to it. The bird doesn't know the experimental setup, but he quickly gets the hang of it. Once he's discovered a possible solution, it's removed, and the Kia has to come up with a new plan. No worries, mate. Now things get really interesting. this solution relies on Newtonian physics.
That's a bit of a stretch.
Got it. There is one last way to reach the nut. The Kia has to choose a stick that's the right length. Not so easy with a curved beak, but he keeps trying. Many animals would have given up in frustration a long time ago. This Kia gets rewarded for his efforts.
Okay. I don't know if you've ever been to New Zealand, any of you, but as I said, I used to live there. And I can tell you that most of us who were campers and backpackers had a love-hate relationship with Kias, because Kias are so intelligent and they're very persistent, and they love to eat any rubber that they can find, or steal any rubber they can, in particular your windshield wiper blades and the rubber around the trunk of your car. Around the trunk of the car, around the front hood of the car. You might have rubber. You've got rubber in your tires. They like to strip it off, and then they use it in their nests. They weave it into their nests. And so it becomes a battle of wits, you and the Kia, to how you're going to keep them from getting the rubber in your car. And I can tell you, you really have to sometimes sweat to figure out ways to do that, because you can try lots of solutions and they figure out how to get to the rubber anyway. Anyway, since we're in New Zealand, I thought I would talk about New Zealand robins, because there's a very nice study not too many years ago that showed that, as they put it, the robins could count. I would say not so much that they can count, but they can distinguish the number 1 from the number 2. So what the researchers did, Garland and Lowe did, is they, oh, by the way, this is a blurry picture of a New Zealand robin. They don't look at, these are common birds, they're friendly birds. That's why they were called robins, though they're not related to robins. But anyway, in this study, what they did is they took a log and they hollowed out a little place in the log. And then they took like a little piece of leather covering, and they could just like cover up the hole. But what they did is they let the robins watch them as they put either 1 or 2 bugs, mealyworms, inside the hole. And if the robin saw you put 2 in the hole, it would take both. If it saw you put 1 in the hole, it would take the 1, and that was all fine. But sometimes what happened was that they would put 2 mealyworms in the hole, but the hole has a false bottom, so that when the robin came, there was only 1 mealyworm that it could find. And it would get very frustrated and very upset and keep looking and looking and looking, because it saw them put 2 in there and it only found 1. So I won't say they can count, but I think it is a nice demonstration that they can recognize the difference between 1 and 2. Well, I'm almost done, but the single most impressive thing I think I've seen birds do, and again, it's Kias, is that they can use probability information. And part of the reason I really like this clip is I do think it's very advanced thinking, but I actually know these birds, these specific Kia, because this segment was obviously filmed at a facility called Willowbrook, which was less than half a mile, less than a kilometer from my house when I lived in New Zealand. And I belonged to Willowbrook and I went there all the time. And they've got this large Kia enclosure, and I used to sit with the Kia. So I actually know these birds. But you can see that this is a study that shows that they can use probability information and also make predictions based on different individuals' past behavior.
The Kia is a particularly intelligent species of parrot from New Zealand. Now, research suggests that these birds might be smarter than anyone expected, even outperforming monkeys in some tasks. These Kia can use probabilities to predict which hand a black token is most likely to be in, based on where the token is picked from and on who is doing the picking, even combining information from different contexts.
The Kea are great fun to work with. They are some of the most intelligent birds I've ever met, and they all have amazing personalities.
Amalia Bastos has been working with Kea, trying to find out whether they could predict uncertain future events.
Could they understand an event that happened with incomplete information? Could they fill in the gaps? So if you imagine that I'm placing my hand into a jar with mostly blue candies and a few yellow candies, and I take something from that jar, but you can't see what's in my hand, you might guess that I've taken a blue candy. And we wanted to see if Kea could do the same thing.
A group of captive Kea were taught that black tokens, and only black tokens, could be exchanged for food. They then saw an experimenter take tokens from 2 jars, without being able to see what was in each hand. They chose a hand by tapping on it to get the token inside. In the first experiment, the Kea almost always preferred the jar with the highest proportion of black tokens, even when the actual number of black tokens in each was the same. This suggests they were choosing the hand based on the probability of it containing a black token, something only previously seen in great apes. A second experiment showed they could even take into account a barrier in the middle of the jar, looking for the jars with the highest proportion of black tokens in the top section and ignoring the rest.
So Kea have a complex social structure where many individuals can live in a group and they come and go as they please. And that means they need to remember the identities of multiple individuals, and they have to interact with multiple individuals. And of course, they need to remember all these interactions. So we wanted to see whether Kea could understand that experimenters have biases or preferences when they make their selections. For example, one person might select a yellow candy even when the yellow candy is in the minority, and another might select a yellow candy when they're in the majority. And what we can assume from that is that the person who took yellow candy when it was in the minority actually prefers yellow candies to blue candies.
The third part of the experiment tested their social skills. The birds were shown 2 humans taking tokens from a jar. One person looked into the jar and deliberately picked one of very few black tokens. When later offered a choice of experimenters, the Kea remembered this person and their apparent preference for black tokens.
We were very surprised to find that Kea can use social cues even from humans to make these judgments. Kea were looking at the biased experimenter, understanding that they had a bias or a preference for a particular type of token, and then selecting this person at test when both experimenters had the same populations of tokens.
Reading humans.
Anyway, again, I used to work with great apes. And when our apes did that, when our chimpanzees did that, you get a science paper out of that when you can demonstrate that. So that's a sign of great intelligence. Well, let me just wind down and finish up by just being really clear about specific about which birds are the smartest. The 2 types of birds that over and over again do best in almost any test you can come up with are parrots on one hand and corvids on the other. What's interesting about this is they're not at all closely related. In fact, they're about as far away from each other on the taxonomic tree of birds as can be. They have 4 things in common, though, and these are most likely the 4 things that drive their intelligence. First off, as the researcher just said, they're highly social. Now, there are other highly social birds, but when you're highly social, you have to interact with many individuals and remember them, and have flexible behavior to deal with them. So being social partly drives it. They're also very slow to mature, slower than most birds. They stay with their parents longer than many birds, and the parents teach them and train them. And so that gives them an opportunity to learn. They also are omnivorous generalists. They eat lots of different types of food rather than always going after the same thing. And so you can see how flexible thinking and intelligence would help that. And finally, they both live in environments that are not static, that change. Kea, for example, live in mountains that are covered with snow in the winter and are, warm and dry in the summer. So they have to negotiate different types of environments, and not all birds have to do that. So I would say corvids and parrots are the smartest birds. But really looking at the big picture, the evolutionary biologist in me can't resist asking the question, is being smart good? Because humans tend to assume that being smart is always good. And the answer I'll give you is actually a more nuanced yes and no. Being smart is good because it lets you manage social relationships, as I said, exploit many food sources, deal with a changing environment. So yeah, you definitely, I mean, that's our great adaptation. We're smart and it's good and it works for us. But I wanted to point out that it doesn't work for everybody. And it doesn't always work when you're competing against dumber individuals that are otherwise well adapted. My favorite example of this, that smart animals don't always win the survival game, is to think about the mammals you run into when you walk around here outside. You may see mice, you may see chipmunks, you may see squirrels, you see some rabbits. I mean, basically what you're seeing are rodents and lagomorphs, which evolved from rodents. If you were here 30 million years ago, every time you're seeing a rodent now, you would have seen an ape or a monkey. Apes and monkeys used to dominate the landscape across much of the world, in fact. But and primates are much smarter than rodents and lagomorphs. But once rodents evolved, they outcompeted the monkeys and the apes and killed them off. And you can see that in the fossil record. If rodents move in, monkeys and apes die off, because primates may be smart, which is a good thing, but rats breed like rabbits. And that's an even better thing in this case. So being smart is good, but it's not the be all and the end all. It doesn't guarantee that you will win the competitive, survival game. But in any case, I hope I've convinced you that birds really are quite smart. They're smarter than dogs. They're smarter than cats. They're smarter than horses. They're about as smart as monkeys in many ways. And in some ways, they're even as smart as apes. So that's pretty good. And I hope you don't call them bird brains anymore. And that's the end of the talk. I'm done. Thank you. I hope you learned something.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kim. I don't see any questions in the chat right now. So if you have any, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask it aloud if you have one.
I put everybody to sleep. No one has any questions.
Kim, thank you.
That was
Oh, I'm sorry.
truly fascinating. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. I love talking about this stuff.
It was fascinating. Thank you. I had one question. Is there a correlation between how social the birds are and how intelligent they are? Have they found that at all?
Well, I'd say there's a partial correlation, and I love your backdrop.
Oh, thank you.
In that the most intelligent birds tend to be very social, but there are lots of really relatively unintelligent birds that are often also social. So it seems to be a necessary prerequisite for intelligence, but by no means guarantees it.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
I do have a question in the chat. Are there studies of birds' understanding of language?
Oh gosh, yes. In fact, when I was a grad student, we had 2 gray parrots in my office, in the big office complex, because there was a grad student who was working with the language abilities of gray parrots, and he had a gray parrot that knew 200 words. It could respond to 200 words. I was working with apes that could respond to 400 words, and we only stopped at 400 because we were running out of memory space, but 200 words is not bad. Yes, so they can learn quite a significant vocabulary.
Any other questions for Kim? We got a couple of people saying thank you in the chat. Well, hearing, Gary, do you have one? Oh, you're still on mute, Gary.
I can't hear.
Can you hear me?
Now we
Yes.
can hear you.
Hi, that was very entertaining. I enjoyed it a lot. You're gonna do one next week?
I'll come back next year with something else if you ask me.
What about songs? Did they learn those or are they born with what?
Okay, I am not an expert in bird song, but my cursory understanding is that some species, don't ask me which, it's really quite instinctive. And there are other species where they certainly learn the songs because there's geographical variation and they learn the songs from the area. There are certain finches I know that do this where they're raised, and it's quite different from, you know, down the road 50 miles. But that is not something I really know much about. Sorry, so I can't
Okay,
say.
thank you.
Mhm.
Do have a couple of questions came in the chat. How do you think intelligence in birds will continue to evolve in the long-term / geological future? That is it still evolving greater complexity?
Oh, I think birds for which intelligence is key, like parrots and corvids, I just hope they're around in evolutionary time. I mean, I hope that, you know, birds survive. I hope we survive. But if they do, it's rare for an animal that has chosen the path of intelligence to become less intelligent. That doesn't happen very often, you know, looking across the animal kingdom. So I would suspect strongly that they would continue to get more and more intelligent over time, because that's their adaptation. You know, I mean, that's how they make it, you know, compared to their competitors. So yeah, it's a guess, but my guess would be absolutely, if they're here, they'll be smarter, you know, in a million years.
And one more is, how do we learn more? How does someone learn more about bird intelligence?
Oh my gosh. Well, there are a couple of new books that have come out recently on bird cognition. So you could certainly look those up in the library. You know, if you got on Libby and tried bird intelligence or bird cognition, there have been 4 or 5 books in the past bunch of years on the topic. I get it by going to scientific journals. So, you know, journals like Animal Behavior, Animal Cognition, you know, periodically have studies about bird intelligence. But like I said, try some of these books that have come out. And there are at least like 4 that I can think of, but I'm bad with titles and authors, so can't do that. Sorry.
Yeah, Ray, do you have a question?
Yeah, you mentioned that maybe parrots, there's some parrot that can recognize what, 200 words?
Mm-hmm.
Well, some parrots are known to speak as well. Do they speak 200 words?
I don't think they speak that many. They certainly can speak. I'm giving you a ballpark figure, like 20 words, and ask for what they want, or respond. And of course, they can mimic human speech, but that's different because they don't really know what they're saying. I'm talking about, you know, you want the carrot, so you're asking for a carrot as opposed to an apple. I'd have to look up to get an exact amount, but the studies that I know, they're in the ballpark of 20, maybe 40 words as opposed to 200.
So those 200 are commands, or what are they?
Right, you know, or questions, or you can ask them to, yeah, I'd say commands, because you can say, you know, give me the carrot. You know, they've got 6 things in front of them, and you say, give me the carrot, and they give you the carrot. Yeah, so they're responding to you saying the word.
But they don't put words together in usable sentences or whatever.
I do not know of any research, which does not 100% mean that it's not out there, but I do not know of any research where they string words together in a meaningful way, or where they, like, again, they can mimic human speech, you know, and say quite a few words, but that's just echoing, or where they use any sort of grammar. That distinguishes them from apes. My research, in fact, was looking at the grammatical capabilities, some of my research, of chimps. And so what we did with our chimps, for example, and I don't know of any birds that can do this, is that, you know how when you had little kids, you had refrigerator magnets of different shapes that you could put, you know, on the refrigerator and they'd stick? That's what we had for the apes, and each shape stood for a different word. It didn't look like the words, you know, I mean, they like apple was a blue circle, but they also had question marks, they had plural markers, and they had to, if they wanted something, for example, they'd have to, if they wanted 2 of them, they'd have to put 2 apples, and then they have to put plural after the word apple. I've never seen a study that birds doing anything like that.
Thank you very much. This has all been terrific.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it. I love to teach about birds and intelligence.
So, Susie, I saw you unmuted. Did you have a question?
And I did, but then I forgot it.
Happens to the best of us.
Well, I think we should all go have dinner.
I have a
Ken, yeah.
I have a very quick one.
Mhm.
Our son used to feed our Steller's jays in the backyard when he would come home from work,
Mhm.
and they would recognize his car.
I
And,
believe you there.
and they wouldn't bug us during the day because they knew that he was the one that fed them. And as soon as he got home, they would come to the backyard where his computer desk was looking through a slider, and then they would start yelling for peanuts. He would throw a hand of peanuts out, and they would start picking them up, but they would weigh them. They would feel the weight of the peanut, and if it didn't have the 2 nuts in it that they expected, they'd drop it and grab one that did, because they knew by the time they flew away and ate it and came back, it might be gone, because there were about 6 Steller's jays out there feeding on the peanuts.
That's a great example of, like, you know, their natural, you know, them naturally expressing intelligence. It doesn't surprise me that they do that. They're well known, but many jays and crows are well known to identify individuals who are either nice or mean to them, and then treat them accordingly. In fact, jays and crows have been known to give gifts to people. Like if you feed them all summer or all winter, they may start dropping things right by your front door, you know, obviously that they don't need, but they think maybe you'd like. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me in the least that they would recognize it, would get excited, and, you know, and the fact that they would take a heavy peanut doesn't surprise me either, because that's, you know, it's like, yeah, this one's got 2 of them in there. So yeah, that's a really nice example. Thank you.
All right. Well, yeah. Thanks again, Tim, for spending your Friday evening with us. This has been a really interesting talk, and I definitely learned a lot myself. And so thank you for joining us tonight and presenting all that information.
Okay. Enjoy, guys. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great
Bye.
rest of your weekend.